Police officers of Reddit. Who's the smartest criminal you've ever encountered? Not a cop, and this is not as smart as some of the guys on here, but it's probably one of the smartest robberies in my small city. One of the main streets is cut into a hillside, and, as a result, there is a very steep and quite tall concrete-covered bank immediately behind the buildings. Between two buildings there is a gap that was filled at the street end by an ATM. To access it for filling, the security staff went through the next door building, out a side door and into the gap, which had the ATM at one end and the steep bank at the other. On the Friday before Christmas, when the ATM was to be filled to the brim, one of the robbers abseiled down the bank at night into the gap and waited for the guys to arrive to fill the ATM. They came early in the morning. As they came through the door into the gap, he held them up, took the money, and took off through the building to an accomplice waiting in a van on the main street. Then the van took off on the main road out of the city and vanished. After a big search, the police finally found the burnt-out van. Turned out the gang had driven it up a gorge road and had two other accomplices in cars at the top and bottom of the gorge who simultaneously drove really slowly into the gorge and held up the traffic so that no one was there to see them when they turned off down an access road into some bush. They ended up being caught because one of the gang was a former employee of the security company. Newspaper coverage of the crime. And the black fire exit between these two buildings is where the ATM was. The little side road coming off the bottom of the main road here is where they turned off the gorge. Not a police officer, but was an RA in college. My university owned all the houses adjacent to campus. These were ran like dorms, with RAs, and the same rules, which included a very strict no alcohol policy. It was a privilege to live in the houses, and priority was given to upperclassmen who were more likely to bend that rule because they were of age and it was harder to police off campus in houses. There was a student who went around knocking on doors saying something like, "I'm an RA and housing director's name sent me for health and wellness checks." She'd find their booze, take it, and follow up with how she's doing them a favor by just giving them a warning. She wasn't actually an RA and was just keeping the booze for herself. The only reason she got found out was because she did it to an actual RA. The RA was male, they kept men and women housing separate, and just assumed he didn't know her because of that. It was only later he questioned why they had a female doing wellness checks on male housing. They did an investigation and asked other residents. Incidents dated back previous 2 years. Never found out who it was. There was a guy with over 50 speeding charges, with the name Jazdy. He was in a different car, with a different disguise every single time. Eventually, after the government set up a special task force to take down this guy, they realized that Jazdy means driver's license in Polish. Clarification, it was 50 different people. The police just wrote down their name as Jazdy every time someone with a Polish driver's license was caught speeding. Working in a home improvement store when younger, this guy came in, went to the snow blowers, took one and went to the return desk. Said he wanted to return it but had no receipt. They told him you need a receipt, so he says okay, I'll be back, and wheels it off the car through the front door. He did this a few times apparently. Couple places even helped him load it back into his car. Dude noticed that the bank vault had put its safety deposit boxes in a way that there was a space at the 90-degree point that wall meets wall. He times it on a Friday and climbed and hid in that spot. He had actually rented out a box which he put in a clock which alarms violently to see if there are sound sensors in the vault. Waited outside, nothing. Employees closed the vault with him inside. He has the whole weekend and gets to knocking the locks out with a hammer one at a time and stole everything. He then replaced the locks back to look like they are not tampered with and jumped back into the spot. Monday morning the vault is open. Turns out bank was doing renovations. He picked that day, throws on a worker's jacket and literally walks out the bank. Employees did not notice till the first person who came to open his safety deposit box. The lock fell in. They could not identify who did it and he would have got away with it save his big mouth. Turns out he was a hairdresser and kept telling his customers how he stole from the bank and he was a genius and they will never catch him. Someone snitched and he was picked up. They could not value what he stole as safety box contents are unknown. Because of this dude, all banks now fill the space where the two safety cabinets meet with concrete. Made a movie Inside Man loosely based on him. Learns about smartest criminals, becomes smartest criminal himself. I remember an officer telling me about a BNE alarm he and his team responded to. No one was there to report the alarm. It must have been a security monitoring company that called. When police showed up, everything seemed normal. Most lights were off, and there was an employee still working. Explains he was there working late and must have set off an alarm. They almost believed him until he said before saying the name of the company he worked for. After that it was downhill, but with a little more research he would have pretty much gotten away with it. A guy, let's call him Dave, I worked with told this story. He was working at a Mercedes dealership. He was sitting at his desk when this well-dressed gentleman comes in and asks if he could test drive a specific car that was parked out front. It was also a busy day. Usually they are allowed to let people test drive by themselves after they have taken some form of a deposit or something, maybe the official ID or something, not really relevant. So Dave gives out the keys. The guy goes on his test drive and comes back a reasonable amount of time later. He walks in and hands off the key, gets his deposit/whatever back. This was about closing time, even possibly on a Friday. Everything is in order. Fast forward to the next business day. Dave's boss walks in and realizes that one of the Mercedes out front is gone. Dave has to explain that the car was returned and that they have the key and everything. Turns out the criminal didn't test drive. He drove somewhere to create a replica of the key and gave that replica back to the desk. He kept the real key. That smart son of a bitch. Edit, Dave is not the criminal. He is the employee. Apparently people think Dave is the criminal, laughing face. Edit 2, it was probably part of this group. Edit 3, okay maybe the key wasn't copied but switched or something. I didn't put much thought into the details of the story since Dave told me this story a few years ago. I also don't know much about key security on modern cars. Definitely, this guy, who ate the bank robbery note right off the hood of the police car when they were emptying his pockets. Although I'm fairly sure he was still convicted. There's a hoarder on block the whose porch is covered in junk. There's also someone trying to sell their house. For some reason people on Craigslist seem to think that everything on the hoarder's porch is free to take even though the hoarder has made numerous calls to the police saying it isn't and denies posting it on Craigslist herself. I wonder who could have the motive to do such a thing. One guy would print barcodes, bring them into Home Depot and stick them on merchandise in the $100 range. When scanned the items came up around the $10 range. Putting random barcodes on things isn't really illegal and super hard to notice. Guy 2 would come in an hour later and buy the underpriced stuff. Complete plausible deniability. They would then sell the stuff on eBay. Only reason they got caught is because the guy with the barcode printer/software cut the second guy out of the operation, so guy 2 stole a bunch of barcodes, put them on the merchandise and paid for it immediately afterwards. He then proceeded to rat on the first guy and spilled the beans. They had been doing this on a weekly basis for over 4 years. Because we could only pin the one case on him, the burglary was dropped down to a petty theft and he walked away with a few days in county and a small fine. Dude probably took Home Depot for tens of thousands over the years. Not a police officer, but I once dealt with a criminal who forged court documents facilitating his own release from prison. I'm not a cop, but I worked crime scene. This guy had attached GPS to the bottom of people's cars who owned houses he wanted to rob. He did it to ensure they wouldn't be showing up while he was ransacking the place. Most of them are really stupid, so this guy isn't a criminal mastermind, but here goes. He wanted to rob a jeweler's on our city's main street. So he found out the flat beside the jeweler's was empty and he hid there. For 2 weeks he triggered the alarm on purpose several times a night. Massive headache for the police and the business. We turned up to see nothing there, nothing on cameras. Thought it was just a fluke, so the jewelers turned off the alarm system and said they'd wait until the morning to get a new one installed or that one rewired because something wasn't right. As soon as he heard that and the police leaving, he tore down the wall, had already been working on this apparently, and robbed the place, taking his sweet time. Escaped without anyone noticing anything for hours, until the jewelers came back in the morning. Then he tried to resell something he stole which had a serial number on it and got caught. So not that smart after all. Good effort though. I remember getting into a festival and seeing a magician guy do tricks on the people searching him to distract them from the drugs he had on him. Spectacular show, and I'm sure he made good profit. If the police officers knew, they'd be talking about it on here. But I doubt it. I remember some thieves would go and trigger the alarm of a vacant Blockbuster after they all started closing down. They did this for 2 weeks straight. So I guess the cops became convinced that this was a false alarm going off at the exact same time every night, so they stopped rushing to investigate. One day we find out that the pharmacy next to the Blockbuster was broken into through the wall they shared. Not only that, but there was only one tiny section the wall that wasn't covered in shelves and panels in the pharmacy, So the thieves had to know exactly which part of the Blockbuster wall to break through. Still pretty impressed by the heist these junkies managed to pull off. I have a friend who is no longer a criminal but committed crimes for about 15 years and never got arrested or even investigated. Some of his highlights: growing weed in a shed on his neighbor's property. The neighbor was old and never left the house. Buying a building under a fake name, taking out huge loans against it, getting HUD money, and burning it all down. Sold fake raffle tickets to raffle off stuff he never had and never raffled. I can't remember how many times he pulled that scam, but he bought a new car with the money. He moved a bunch of times because people would suspect him of being a con man. His dad was in jail for similar stuff, but he was never even questioned by the police about anything. Now he has a family and a normal job. Like, comment, subscribe, share, download, embed, save, dab, yeet. Have a great day, fam.